Welcome all. Today I'll talk about the text that is there in your syllabus, Bradstreet's Prologue. The poet of Prologue, Anne Bradstreet, is prominent of the English poets of North America, for she is the first Puritan women figure in American literature. In the earlier video of contextualizing Bradstreet, I have already spoken about Puritanism, which goes on to make our understanding of this poem as an important turn of event easy. But before moving directly into the text, let's first talk about the publication history because this is something which is very important. The prologue is a part of the book The 10th Muse Lately Sprung Up in America. It was submitted to the publisher in London by Bradstreet's brother-in-law, John Cambridge, and Bradstreet had no idea about the same. There are also views that Bradstreet knew about the publication but was forced to pretend so as to prevent risks of harsh criticism. So there is a controversy around this, whether Bradstreet knew about the submission or not. What is the reason of this? Now, if you all remember, I have referred to Anne Hutchinson in one of my earlier videos, who was radical in her views and so had to suffer criticism as well as banishment in the Puritan Society of America. So you can well understand the time of Bradstreet was not an easy one for women. Another interesting thing that I would like to point out is from the preface to the book. In the preface to the 10th Muse, which is often thought to have been written by her brother-in-law, there's a line which reads, you can see it in the screen, "It is the work of a woman, honored and esteemed where she lives. For her gracious demeanor, her eminent parts, her pious conversation, her courteous disposition, her exact diligence in her place, and discreet managing of her family occasions, and more than so, these poems are the fruit but of some few hours curtailed from her sleep and other refreshments." Now, this lines sounds more like a clarification than an introduction. Here, the one who has written this preface makes it clear that she is a woman who is conforming to the notions of the stereotypes that the Puritan society has imposed. Means the Puritan society had a kind of idea about the women, and Bradstreet, in spite of writing this piece, has fulfilled her duties as a woman that the Puritan society demanded from a woman. So, and she is also someone who has all the angelic qualities because she is someone who has a gracious demeanor, she is pious, she is very discreet in managing of her family occasions, and in spite of the fact that she has written this, it should not be considered that she has hampered her household duties. Actually, what is this is, it's more of a kind of precaution than just a general introduction. And it is taken so that the Puritan society does not consider Bradstreet's poetic endeavor as norm-breaking, transgressive, or anti-Puritan, because the 1650s was still the heyday of Puritanism. Now, before we move on to the poem, I'd like to draw your attention to the title, The 10th Muse Lately Sprung Up in America. Significant here is the use of the compound word 10th Muse. The Muses, I think most of you know, in ancient Greek religion and mythology are considered as the inspirational goddess of literature, science and the arts. But then there are only 9 number of muses, right? Well, the 10th muse is the word of appreciation that Plato uses for Sappho, the great women poet from Lesbos of the 6th century BC. So Bradstreet, by using 10th muse, is attempting to trace her lineage on one hand, and on the other hand is trying to remind her readers of a rich heritage of women's poetry appreciated by the Western classical masters. So you all can actually find a meticulous progression everywhere in Bradstreet. Now let's read the poem together. In this video, we'll be doing the first two stanzas. To sing of wars, of captains and of kings, of cities founded, commonwealths begun. For my mean pain are two superior things, or how they all or rich their debts have run. Let poets and historians set this forth. My obscure lines shall not so dim their worth. Now see, in the very first three lines, the poet appears very humble. She refers to her pen as mean, means something which is inferior, for attempting topics like that of kings, of wars and of cities founded. She leaves these themes to the poets and historians, for she feels that her lines, her words, her verses are unclear and hence will not do enough justice to these topics. Now I would like to point two things here. Firstly, the use of the word poets. She is not considering herself as a poet when she in the fifth line is saying, let poets and historians set this forth. So she is telling that let the poets and the historians write about these things, about wars and captains and kings and cities. Now, so when she is using the word poets, she is clearly indicating that she is someone who is using a mean pen, means who is inferior in quality and who cannot be considered as a poet. Secondly, the topic that she is intending not to speak about, means about the wars and captains and kings, are basically the thematic areas covered in poetry by epic. This is significant in context of the sixth paragraph where she will be talking about Caleb. So remember this stanza because when we'll be discussing sixth stanza, the stanza 6, then I'll refer back to this first stanza. Now let's move to the second stanza. But when my wandering eyes and envious heart great Barter's sugared lines do but read over, fool, I do grudge the muses did not part betwixt him and me that overfluent store. Our Barters can do what a Barters will, but simple I according to my skill. So in this stanza, she is actually talking about her admiration as well as her inspiration. Wandering eyes and envious heart are the two phrases that she is using about herself in context of her interaction with Bartas's poetry. Wandering eyes, try to visualize the word. Now, I don't think there can be a phrase that can more aptly describe the admiration of the poet, like wandering eyes, eyes that are round and full of surprise and astonishment, and is a kind of eyes that are flowing with flowing with admiration. Means it is full of admiration. So this word actually very much aptly describes what she wants to mean or what she wants to communicate. An envious heart speaks both of admiration and also of inspiration. The fact that she is affected by his poetry make her want to excel like him. So she is telling that she is jealous. When one is jealous, what does that person do? That person wants to compete, wants to be like that, and also imitates that person, right? So this envious heart is something that is not only talking about the admiration that Bradstreet has for Bartas, but is also suggesting that Bartas has been her inspiration. Now these two are the reaction that she has after reading Bartas. Sugared lines. Sugared lines. Now this sugared lines here indicate the melody of the poet's poetry, its beauty and grace. Now you all may have a question that who is this Bartas? Du Bartas was a French poet who was celebrated across 16th and 17th century Europe for his divine poetry, as for instance the biblical epic that he wrote, Judith. And there is also another text that the English translation of the name reads, the week or creation of the world. Now his theological beliefs were also similar to the Puritans. So you can well understand the divine poetry of Bartas as inspiration and influence on her poetry not only is a confession that she makes, but also can pacify to a certain extent Puritan rage. Means maybe she has this type of notion also working in her mind. This type of affiliations and confession about such an affiliation associated with the divine, because the Bartus was the poet of divine things, is often found in the proto-feminist phase of Eastern and Western cultures. In the description box, I'll share with you a link which is part of my semester 5 lectures, where I've spoken about the divine affiliations of the proto-feminist in context of an Indian autobiography that the Sem 5 students have in their syllabus. You can check that if you want to. Now, moving back into the poem, she refers to herself as a fool because the muses, she says, have been discriminating and had between Bartus and the poet has enriched Bartus more. And so she says that Bartus is blessed and can only be compared to Bartus himself. It's he who can write the graceful poetry of his kind, whereas Bradstreet can only use her skill, which is not blessed like the male poet Bartus. Now, so what is the poet doing in this stanza? In this stanza, unlike the way she did in the first stanza, she is not only presenting her admiration, but is also trying to satiate the male ego by her praise-laden words. So you can well understand that she is trying, through her poetry, she is not only presenting whatever she has in mind, but she is also trying to pacify the expected rage of the Puritan society and also of the patriarchal society. Okay, but since she is writing, so she is also transgressing, we can say, because she is trying to actually make a space for her poetry by her humbleness, because all these words that we have read in stanza 1 and stanza 2 shows the humbleness that the poet is displaying before us, or the humbleness that the poet is versifying, whether it be for justifying her stand, her position, or it may also be because she has a kind of fear in her mind. Okay, so for today I stop here. In my next video I shall discuss the remaining stanzas. Thank you all for joining.